I recently posted a mini-series on intervals, what they are and how to play them on the guitar. This included in the last lesson interval inversions. This is a compilation of all of that in one video, so if you are studying intervals, you'll have all this information in one place. And for reference, you may want to download the free intervals PDF. I'll leave a link for that in the description. In standard music notation, the interval of a second is simply the next note up or down the music staff. Seconds are also called steps. These are steps up, and these are steps down. You can further define steps as half steps and whole steps. On the guitar, a half step is the distance of one fret, and a whole step is the distance of two frets. Whole steps and half steps have other names as well. A whole step is a major second, and a half step is a minor second. And most scales are made up of regular patterns of half steps and whole steps. For example, the major scale, every major scale, is made up of the same sequence as whole steps and half steps. That's going to be whole step, half step, whole, half. Here's a C major scale laid out on one string. We begin counting the whole steps and half steps after we play the tonic or starting note of the scale. So there's our starting note or our tonic. From there we count whole, half, whole, half. And here's a B flat major scale laid out on one string. The notes are different, but the whole step, half step pattern is the same. Starting note B flat, and then whole, half, whole, half. To play melodies and scales efficiently, you need to be able to play whole steps and half steps, or major and minor seconds, along one string. Also, you need to find them moving from one string to the next. To play a half step along the same string, that's easy. Just play the next fret up or down. To play a half step switching from one string to the next, you're mostly going to be moving 4 frets away, with the exception of when you're moving between strings 2 and 3. So if your first note is on the 6th string, and you want to play a half step or a minor second higher on the 5th string, you play 4 frets lower, and vice versa. Same if you're moving between strings 5 and 4, and 4 and 3. Now here's our exception. If your lower note is on the 3rd string, then 3 frets lower on the 2nd string will be a half step higher, and vice versa. And that is because of how the guitar is tuned. And then if your first note is on the 2nd string, we're back to 4 frets lower on the 1st string, being a half step or a minor second higher, and vice versa. Now whole steps. To play a whole step along the same string, just play 2 frets distance, up or down. Now if your first note is on the 6th string, 3 frets lower on the 5th string will be a whole step or major second higher, and vice versa. Same if your first note is on the 5th string, moving to the 4th string, 3 frets distance. And same if you're moving from 4 to 3, string 4 to 3. And here's our exception again because of the way the guitar is tuned. If your lower note is on the 3rd string, moving to string 2, if you want to play a major second or a whole step higher, you'll move 2 frets distance, and vice versa. And if your lower note is on the 2nd string, and you want to play a whole step higher on the 1st string, that's back to 3 frets distance, and vice versa. You can use this information to deepen your understanding of scale charts. It's one thing to memorize a scale pattern, it's another thing to understand where your whole steps and half steps are. Here's a common major scale form. This is the tonic, or your starting note. And from there, whole, half, whole, half. Then it starts over, whole, half, whole, and half. In the music staff, if a note is in a space, the note in the next space up or down is a third higher or lower. And if a note is on a line, the next line up or down is a third higher or lower. When counting intervals, your starting note is 1. For example, C, D, E, 1, 2, 3. C and E are a third apart. You can further define thirds as major thirds and minor thirds. On the guitar, a major third is the distance of 4 frets, and a minor third is the distance of 3 frets. A minor interval is always going to be 1/2 step or 1 fret smaller than its corresponding major interval. The reason we have major and minor intervals has to do with the major scale. As already mentioned, C to E is a third. When you're trying to figure out the quality of an interval, major or minor, build a major scale starting on the lower note of that interval. In other words, think of the lower note as the tonic. For example, when you build a C major scale using the whole step, half, whole, half pattern, you get C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and C. The note E is the third note of a C major scale. It belongs in that scale, so E is a major third higher than C. If you lower that E to E flat, that E flat is a minor third higher than C. And a note about terminology. In non-classical music, the major third is often referred to as just 3, while a minor third is often called flat 3. And this has nothing to do with whether that third is a flat, sharp, or natural note. It just describes that note in relation to the major scale. For example, D and F sharp are a major third apart. A non-classical musician might refer to this F sharp as the 3. Lower that F sharp to F natural, and you have a minor third higher than D, which a non-classical musician may call flat 3. That being said, I'm going to use the terms major and minor third in this lesson. To play a major third higher on the same string, play 4 frets higher, and vice versa. To play a minor third higher on the same string, play 3 frets higher, and vice versa. Now we're going to find major and minor thirds moving from one string to the next. If your lower note is on the 6th string, and you want to play a major third higher on the 5th string, that's just going to be 1 fret distance, and vice versa. Same if you're moving from string 5 to 4, and 4 to 3. Now, because of the way the guitar is tuned, it's going to be different when you're moving between strings 3 and 2. A major third between strings 3 and 2 is going to be the same fret. And moving between strings 2 and 1, we're back to 1 fret distance. And minor thirds. If your lower note is on the 6th string, and you want to play a minor third higher, you play 2 frets away on the 5th string, and vice versa. Same if you're moving between strings 5 and 4, and 4 and 3. And again, because of the way the guitar is tuned, this is going to be different moving between strings 3 and 2. That's just going to be 1 fret distance, and then strings 2 to 1, 2 frets distance. In the music staff, a fourth is 4 steps distance. C, D, E, F, 1, 2, 3, 4. C and F are a fourth apart. And you can count down from the higher note. C, B, A, G, 1, 2, 3, 4. C down to G, that's also a fourth. You can further define fourths as perfect fourths or augmented fourths. On the guitar, a perfect fourth is a distance of 5 frets, or 2 whole steps and a half step. Whole step, half step. And an augmented fourth is the distance of 6 frets, or 3 whole steps. 1, 2, 3 whole steps. Because the augmented fourth is 3 whole steps distance, it is also called a tritone. The tritone is a special interval. I have an entire video on just the tritone, and I'll leave a link for that in the description. But for this lesson, suffice to say that an augmented interval is always going to be 1/2 step or 1 fret larger than the corresponding perfect interval. So here's a perfect fourth. Augmented fourth is 1 fret higher. You can use the major scale to figure out if a fourth is perfect or augmented. To do this, build a major scale beginning from the lower note of the interval. If the upper note, which you already know is a fourth higher, belongs in the scale, the interval is a perfect fourth. If that other note does not belong in that major scale and is a 1/2 step higher, it is an augmented fourth. For example, when you build a C major scale using the whole, half, whole, half step pattern, you get C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and C. The note F is a fourth higher than the note C, and the note F is also the fourth note of a C major scale. So F is a perfect fourth higher than C. If you change that F to F sharp, you now have an augmented fourth. And a note about terminology. In non-classical music, the perfect fourth is often referred to as just 4, while an augmented fourth is often called sharp 4. And this has nothing to do with whether that fourth higher is a flat, sharp, or natural note. It just describes it in relation to the major scale. For example, F and B flat are a perfect fourth apart. A non-classical musician might refer to this B flat as the 4. Raise that B flat to B natural, and you have an augmented fourth, which a non-classical musician might call sharp 4. That being said, I'm going to use the terms perfect and augmented fourth for this lesson. To play a perfect fourth higher on the same string, just play 5 frets higher, and vice versa. To play an augmented fourth higher on the same string, play 6 frets higher, and vice versa. That's a pretty big move on the guitar, especially if you're trying to play faster. It's more practical to play perfect and augmented fourths moving from one string to the next. The guitar is tuned in perfect fourths, except when you're moving between strings 2 and 3, so perfect fourths are pretty easy to find. If your lower note is on the 6th string, then same fret on the 5th string is a perfect fourth higher, and vice versa. Same if you're moving from string 5 to 4, 4 and 3. Because of the way the guitar is tuned, if you're moving between strings 3 and 2, it's going to be 1 fret distance to get a perfect fourth, and then string 2 and 1, same fret to get a perfect fourth. And augmented fourths. If your lower note is on the 6th string, an augmented fourth higher will be on the 5th string, 1 fret distance. And here's an augmented fourth from string 5 to 4, 4 and 3. And again, because of the way the guitar is tuned, strings 3 and 2 will be different. There's your augmented fourth there, and strings 2 and 1. In the music staff, a fifth is 5 steps distance. C, D, E, F, G, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, C, and G are a fifth apart. And you can also count down from the higher note. C, B, A, G, F, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. F is a fifth lower than C. You can further define fifths as perfect, diminished, and augmented. On the guitar, a perfect fifth is the distance of 7 frets, or 3 whole steps and a half step. So, whole, half. A diminished interval is 1/2 step or 1 fret smaller than a perfect interval, and an augmented interval is 1/2 step or 1 fret larger than its corresponding perfect interval. So a diminished fifth is a distance of 6 frets, or 3 whole steps, 1, 2, 3 whole steps, and an augmented fifth is the distance of 8 frets, or 4 whole steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. Because the diminished fifth is 3 whole steps distance, it's also called a tritone. The tritone is a special interval. I have an entire video on just the tritone. I'll leave a link for that in the description. You can use the major scale to figure out if a fifth is perfect, augmented, or diminished. To do that, build a major scale from the lower note of the interval. If the upper note, which you already know is a fifth higher, belongs in the scale, the interval is a perfect fifth. If that upper note is a half step lower than the fifth note of that major scale, it is a diminished fifth. And if the higher note is a half step higher than the fifth note of that scale, it is an augmented fifth. For example, when you build a C major scale using the whole, whole, half step pattern, you get C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and C. The note G is the fifth note of a C major scale. So G is a perfect fifth higher than C. If you change that G to G flat, which is a half step lower than G, you now have a diminished fifth. And if you change that G to G sharp, which is a half step higher than G, you have an augmented fifth. A note about terminology. In non-classical music, the perfect fifth is often referred to as just 5. A diminished fifth can be called flat 5, and an augmented fifth can be called sharp 5. And this has nothing to do with whether that fifth is a flat, sharp, or natural note. It just describes it in relation to the major scale. That being said, I'm going to use the terms perfect, diminished, and augmented fifth in this lesson. Here's how you can play perfect fifths, moving between strings 6 and 5, and 6 and 4. Between 5 and 4, and 5 and 3, between strings 4 and 3, and 4 and 2, between strings 3 and 2, 3 and 1, and 2 and 1. And diminished fifths. String 6 moving to string 5, diminished fifth, 5 to 4, 4 and 3, 3 and 2, this is different because of the way the guitar is tuned, 2 frets distance, and strings 2 and 1. And augmented fifths. Here's an augmented fifth moving between strings 6 and 5, and 6 and 4, 5 and 4, 5 and 3, 4 and 3, 4 and 2, 3 and 2, 3 and 1, and 2 and 1. In the music staff, a sixth is 6 steps distance. C, D, E, F, G, A, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. C and A are a sixth apart. And you can count down from the higher note. C, B, A, G, F, E, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. E is a sixth lower than C. You can further define sixths as major and minor. On the guitar, a major sixth is a distance of 9 frets. A minor interval is 1 half step or 1 fret smaller than a major interval, so a minor sixth is a distance of 8 frets. You can use the major scale to figure out if a sixth is major or minor. To do that, build a major scale beginning from the lower note of the interval. If the upper note, which you already know is a sixth higher, belongs in that scale, the interval is a major sixth. If that upper note is a half step lower than the sixth note of the major scale, it is a minor sixth. For example, when you build a C major scale using the whole step, half step, whole, half pattern, you get C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and C. The note A is the sixth note of a C major scale, so A is a major sixth higher than C. If you change that A to A flat, which is a half step lower than A, you now have a minor sixth. And a note about terminology. In non-classical music, the major sixth is often referred to as just sixth, and a minor sixth can be called flat sixth. And this has nothing to do with whether that sixth is a flat, sharp, or natural note. It only describes it in relation to the major scale. That being said, I'm going to use the terms major and minor sixth in this lesson. This is how you play a major sixth on the guitar between strings 6 and 5, and between strings 6 and 4, between strings 5 and 4, and 5 and 3, between strings 4 and 3, and 4 and 2, so same fret here, between strings 3 and 2, you'll have to stretch over a bit for this one, and 3 and 1, same fret, and strings 2 and 1. And minor sixths. Minor sixths moving between strings 6 and 5, and 6 and 4, between strings 5 and 4, and 5 and 3, between strings 4 and 3, and 4 and 2, 3 and 2, and strings 3 and 1, and strings 2 and 1. In the music staff, a seventh is 7 steps distance. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, C and B are a seventh apart. And you can count down from the higher note. C, B, A, G, F, E, D, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. D is a seventh lower than C. You can further define sevenths as major and minor. On the guitar, a major seventh is the distance of 11 frets. A minor interval is 1 fret or 1/2 step smaller than a major interval, so a minor seventh is the distance of 10 frets. You can use the major scale to figure out if a seventh is major or minor. To do that, build a major scale from the lower note of the interval. If the upper note, which you already know is a seventh higher, belongs in the scale, the interval is a major seventh. If that upper note is a 1/2 step lower than the seventh of that major scale, you have a minor seventh. For example, when you build a C major scale using the whole step, half step, whole, half pattern, you get C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and C. The note B is the seventh note of a C major scale, so B is a major seventh higher than C. If you change that B to B flat, which is a 1/2 step lower than B, you now have a minor seventh. And a note about terminology. In non-classical music, the major seventh is often referred to as just 7, and a minor seventh can be called flat 7. And this has nothing to do with whether that seventh is a flat, sharp, or natural note. It just describes it in relation to the major scale. That being said, I'm going to use the terms major and minor seventh in this lesson. Here's how you can play a major seventh moving between strings 6 and 4. So the notes are 2 strings apart, but just 1 fret distance. Between strings 5 and 3, same, 1 fret distance. Strings 4 and 2, 2 frets distance now, because of the way the guitar is tuned. And strings 3 and 1, same, 2 frets distance. minor sevenths. Minor seventh moving between strings 6 and 4, same fret. You just skip over a string. Same between strings 5 and 3. Because of the way the guitar is tuned, it's going to be different between strings 4 and 2, 1 fret distance. And same if you're moving between strings 3 and 1, 1 fret distance. An octave is the distance of 8 notes. Octo, 8. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The easiest way to think of an octave is that it's the next higher or lower iteration of that note. So C, C an octave higher. On the guitar, an octave is the distance of 12 frets. And most guitars have double dot fret markers at the 12th fret, and that 12th fret is an octave higher than its corresponding open string. So E, E an octave higher. A an octave higher. D, G, B, and E again. And here's how you can play octaves on the guitar. Octaves between strings 6 and 4, and 6 and 3, 5 and 3, 5 and 2, 4 and 2, and 4 and 1, and 3 and 1. First thing we're going to do is a quick recap of intervals and their quality. As we go forward, one very important thing to keep in mind is which intervals are classified as major or minor, and which intervals are classified as perfect, augmented, or diminished. Seconds, thirds, sixths, and sevenths are classified as major or minor, and fourths, fifths, and octaves can be classified as perfect, augmented, or diminished. And we're going to ignore octaves in this lesson and focus in on the fourths and fifths for our perfect intervals. So we can have a minor second or a major second, a minor third, a major third, a perfect fourth, an augmented fourth, a diminished fifth, which is enharmonically equivalent to the augmented fourth, a perfect fifth, an augmented fifth, minor sixth, which is enharmonically equivalent to augmented fifth, major sixth, minor seventh, major seventh, and the octave. An inversion is what you get when you either raise the lower note of an interval 1 octave or you drop the upper note 1 octave. As you study intervals, you'll find that a second inverts to a seventh and vice versa, a third inverts to a sixth and vice versa, and a fourth inverts to a fifth and vice versa. Notice that the intervals and their inversions each add up to the number 9. So until all this becomes second nature to you, you can do some basic math to figure out your inversions. For example, F up to D is a sixth. If you want to figure out what the inversion would be, you just think 6 plus what equals 9? You guessed it, 3. So if you raise that F an octave, you have a third. And if you lower that D an octave, you still have a third. Another quick example, B up to C is a second. Raise that B an octave, and you have a seventh. Lower the C an octave, and you still end up with a seventh. There is also symmetry in the quality of intervals and their inversions. A major interval always inverts to a minor interval, and a minor interval always inverts to a major interval. Augmented always inverts to diminished, and diminished always inverts to augmented. And a perfect interval always inverts to another perfect interval. Now remember that seconds, thirds, sixths, and sevenths are classified as major or minor, and fourths, fifths, and octaves are classified as perfect, augmented, or diminished. So keeping this in mind and the number 9, a minor second inverts to a major seventh and vice versa. Major second always inverts to a minor seventh, and vice versa. Minor third and major sixth are inversions of each other, and major third and minor sixth are inversions of each other. A perfect fourth always inverts to a perfect fifth and vice versa, and the augmented fourth and diminished fifth are inversions of each other. Understanding intervals is fundamental in understanding how scales and chords are built. Most of our scales are built on set patterns of major and minor seconds. And the chords we play are based on major and minor thirds for the most part, so the third is an especially important interval. And all of the intervals are important in understanding chord structure and harmony.